The moment Jim Jones opened his mouth, hip-hop split in two. On one side, Nas fans clutched their classics like scripture. On the other, Dipset believers leaned forward, smirking because someone had finally said it out loud. The spark. A smirk and a microphone on Angie Martinez's IRL podcast. Jim leaned in and said it plain. I ain't saying I'm better than Nas, but name a time in his life where he had this kind of buzz. Let's be real. In that instant, Twitter caught fire. Instagram Reels looped on full volume. Fans, rappers, critics, and trolls all threw their voices into the ring. Some called it blasphemy. Others said, maybe he's not wrong. But this wasn't just rap beef, it was a challenge to legacy. Jim Jones wasn't battling for lyrical supremacy. He was battling for relevance, for the throne of attention in an industry that's shifted from bars to branding. The camera cuts to a flashing montage. Jones' new album At the Church Steps climbing charts. Old Dipset clips stirring nostalgia. And a slow zoom on his Instagram feed where he laughs under a caption that simply reads, "It's trolling." And it worked. Behind the scenes, the fire was spreading. Just days later, footage hit the internet showing Jim in a tense confrontation with Miami music executive Ally Zoe Adams. No fists, but no love either. The dispute. A botched showcase deal and a missing deposit. Another viral moment. Another headline. Another carefully placed piece on the board. Then, in a radio booth, Jim says with calm certainty, "Y'all keep talking, I keep trending. That's the difference." And that, maybe, was the truth behind it all. Jim Jones wasn't looking to out-rap Nas. He was playing a different game entirely. In 2025, attention is currency. And Jim Jones, he was spending it like a king dot as the digital fires kept burning. Something unexpected resurfaced, an old 2005 clip of Nas. Grainy and sharp, sitting in a studio, brushing off a question about Jim Jones with a cold laugh. Who the F asterisk 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 is? That the timing couldn't have been worse or better, depending on your side. The video was picked up by every hip-hop blog and meme page within hours. The comment sections flooded with war cries and think pieces. Some framed it as karma, others as history repeating. But for Jim, it was fuel. On Instagram, he reposted reactions with grinning emojis and captions like, "Now y'all talkin'." He wasn't just responding, he was orchestrating. Old wounds were opening, but this wasn't about ego anymore. This was campaign-level strategy. With his album At the Church Steps climbing the Billboard 200, Jones leaned deeper into the storm. Each diss, each debate, each repost was driving streams. The rollout wasn't built on singles, it was built on spectacle. Meanwhile, on Hot 97 and other major platforms, radio hosts were debating the audacity of it all. Jim Jones got the streets and the internet talkin', one said. He's either crazy or a genius. Industry insiders whispered that the Nas jab was no accident, that it had been timed perfectly with the album drop and his upcoming Summerjam headliner slot. Then came the whispers from inside the venue. Surprise guests, potential Dipset reunion, the possibility of Kanye showing up for a joint performance of their February collab. Every breadcrumb led back to the same question: was Jim Jones chasing controversy or controlling it? As fans lined up arguments across podcasts and TikToks, the man at the center of it all remained calm, calculated. "I told y'all," he said in another clip, voice low and steady. "It's all a rollout. I play the game, I just play it loud." And in the echo chamber of 2025, that was the only volume that mattered. As the dust from the Nas controversy began to settle, life only. Momentarily, Jim Jones was already setting the stage for the next act. Word broke that he would be headlining Hot 97's Summerjam 2025 under the banner Jim Jones and Friends. But insiders hinted that this wouldn't be just any set. Whispers of a full-blown Dipset reunion floated through the industry, stoking excitement from old-school fans and hip-hop purists alike. Others murmured something bolder, that Kanye West himself might show up to perform Tina. Their February collaboration that had lit up the underground and stirred quiet tension within major labels. And if anyone thought this was coincidence, they hadn't been paying attention. This was chess, not checkers. Each headline was a square, each controversy a piece. Jim Jones was moving them all. Instagram teasers showed him in the studio with vintage Dipset footage playing behind him. In one shot, he points to a whiteboard marked up with track names, venues, and the phrase, "Make 'em talk." It wasn't just about music. Anymore was theater, strategy, prophecy. In an era where algorithms reward conflict, Jim was curating chaos like it was an art form. Podcasts buzzed with speculation. Was he reviving a movement or simply exploiting nostalgia? Had Jim Jones become the villain hip-hop needed to stay alive? And as these debates flared, so did his numbers. Spotify saw a 400% spike in streams across his catalog. Twitter kept spinning, threads dissected lyrics. And TikTok flooded with edits of old Dipset anthems stitched over new headlines. Through it all, Jim stayed composed. In a rare behind-the-scenes clip from rehearsals, he wiped sweat from his brow and looked directly at the camera. "They said I couldn't lead the game," he muttered, half smiling. But the game follows noise. In that moment, you realize something: the man wasn't riding a wave. He was generating it by the time Jim Jones stepped onto that Summerjam stage. The industry wasn't just watching, they were bracing. The lights dropped, the crowd roared, and before a single verse hit the mic, the energy made one thing clear. This wasn't nostalgia. This was disruption. As Dipset banners unfurled behind him and the opening chords of We Fly High blasted through the speakers, grown men threw up bird signs and teenagers live-streamed in awe. But the biggest surprise came midway through the set, when Jones paused the music and addressed the Nas controversy head-on. "I said what I said," he told the crowd, pacing slow, voice steady. "And guess what? Y'all been talking about it every day since." The crowd erupted. In that moment, the diss wasn't a diss anymore. It was part of a narrative. A statement about power, legacy, and whose story gets told. Backstage, celebrities lined the corridors. Cameron, Jewels, even Busta Rhymes stopped by with a nod of approval. But while some cheered, others stayed silent. Rap blogs reported that Nas's camp was disappointed but unbothered. Charlemagne Thaw, God called Jim's comments clever baiting, while Abro suggested Jones was weaponizing nostalgia and outrage to rewrite relevance. Online, fans drew battle lines. Threads on Reddit and X blew up with arguments about era supremacy, lyrical depth, and clout chasing. But behind the noise, there was a quieter story emerging, one about strategy. Jim Jones wasn't just climbing back into the conversation, he was flipping the rules of it. In a sit-down interview released the next morning, he leaned back in his chair and shrugged. "They act like I broke the culture," he said. "Nah, I just reminded y'all it was alive." And with that, he closed his eyes and nodded to his own beat, a man unbothered by permission, moving to a rhythm only he seemed to understand. In the days that followed Summerjam, the conversation didn't slow, it detonated. Clips from Jim Jones' performance were everywhere. The moment he paused to call out the Nas backlash became a soundbite looped across TikTok, Instagram Reels, and hip-hop commentary YouTube channels. Some called it iconic, others desperate. But the message was clear. Jones had stirred something deeper than hype. He had cracked into the fragile crust of hip-hop's generational fault lines. And now the tremors were being felt across the culture. Behind closed doors, whispers leaked from label boardrooms and management calls. One exec from a rival camp was overheard saying, "We underestimated him. He weaponized controversy like a marketing team." Meanwhile, Alistairs began responding. In coded ways, Fat Joe posted a photo with the caption, "Respect the grind, even if you don't like the sound." Meek Mill liked a tweet that said, "Jim out here proving relevance ain't about age, it's about moves." And then there was the silence from Nas himself. No diss track, no interview, no cryptic tweet, just stillness, which in hip-hop says everything. Some speculated he saw it as beneath him. Others said he was letting the industry decide who had really won. But for Jim, silence only amplified his echo. He appeared in another podcast days later, eyes hidden, behind tinted aviators, voice smooth. "They don't gotta clap for me," he said. "The headlines already did." And they had. Music publications that had once dismissed him as a relic were now framing him as a case study in digital strategy. College panels even began discussing his moves as part of a wider shift in hip-hop dynamics, how fame in 2025 could be built on tension as much as talent. The game had changed, and Jim Jones hadn't just adapted. He had lit the fuse. And whether you cheered or cringed, you couldn't look away. Weeks passed, but the echoes didn't fade. Cade deepened. Spotify released data showing Jim Jones' entire discography had surged in streams by over 600%, with Gen Z listeners accounting for nearly half of the traffic. Academic blogs were dissecting his moves like a cultural thesis. Music strategists began referring to it as the Jones effect, the idea that calculated disruption, even without traditional chart toppers, could force a seat at the table. But this wasn't just about numbers anymore. It was about impact, the kind that rewrites reputation. For a man once thought to be living in the shadows of Dipset's golden age, Jim Jones was now being discussed in the same breath as rap's most strategic thinkers, not for rhyme schemes, but for narrative control. And yet, with every podcast, every clip, every viral reel, one question lingered in the silence between headlines. What about Nas? His silence remained absolute. No appearance, no tweet. Not even a subliminal. That stillness became louder than any verse. For some, it was maturity. For others, retreat. But it raised the stakes. Because while Jim was dancing in the fire, Nas was standing in shadow, letting the culture speak for him. And speak it did. Older heads warned that moments fade, that streams spike and crash. They said legacy isn't built on controversy. But younger voices fired back, what is legacy if no one's talking about you? And as the hip-hop world spun in that question, Jim Jones kept moving, now booking international shows, prepping merch drops, and teasing a documentary titled Relevance is a Weapon. In one final moment of reflection, caught off guard after a studio session, a tired but grinning Jim looked into a camera phone and said, "They thought I was chasing clout. Nah, I was chasing memory." He paused. "Now they'll never forget me." And maybe that was the point all along. The aftershocks rippled far beyond. Jim Jones and Nas. Inside label offices from Atlanta to LA, executives started reevaluating what it meant to be relevant. In the modern rap ecosystem, it wasn't just about hot verses anymore. It was about moments, controlled chaos, the illusion of spontaneity that behind the curtain was tightly orchestrated. And Jim had shown them the blueprint. Emerging artists began mimicking his approach-provoking discourse online before dropping a single. PR teams started building rollout calendars that included conflict windows and clout triggers. Rap media, once gatekeepers of quality, had become engines of attention, feeding the very machine that Jones had manipulated so well. Meanwhile, Nas's silence became its own myth. The longer he held back, the more divided the discourse became. Some said it was wisdom, that legends don't respond to noise. Others argued that his absence was a missed opportunity, a moment when he could have reminded the culture why he was crowned in the first place. But regardless of which side you stood on, the shape of hip-hop had changed. And Jim Jones, once seen as a hustler from Harlem clinging to past glory, had redrawn the lines of power. His merch drops sold out in 3 hours. His documentary teaser racked up 1 million views in a day. His bookings doubled, not just in New York but across Europe, where his brand of calculated rebellion struck a global nerve. Critics finally began writing what his fans had claimed for weeks, that maybe this wasn't chaos at all. Maybe it was a masterclass. And in that swirl of noise and silence, praise and protest, one truth held steady. Jim Jones didn't just reclaim his place in the culture, he redesigned the path back to it. He didn't ask for a crown. He built his own arena and made sure the cameras were rolling. And in this new era of hip-hop, where virality is legacy and disruption is gospel, that might just be the smartest move anyone's made in years. When the documentary Relevance is a weapon finally dropped, it didn't land, it detonated. In the opening scene, a handheld camera follows Jim Jones through the back halls of Madison Square Garden. The crowd outside roars as he walks slowly, hoodie up, chain swaying. "They said I was done," he murmurs into the lens. "So I gave. Am a reason to say my name again?" That line alone ignited headlines. The film, part gritty confessional, part calculated mythology, pulled no punches. It spliced together podcast clips, backstage fights, unseen studio footage, and raw reactions to the NAZ's backlash. But it also showed the strategy, the team meetings, the whiteboards filled with timelines, even mock-up tweets designed to stir debate. It wasn't just a documentary. It was an expose on how narratives are built. Now, not just in hip-hop, but in the age of digital war. Fans flooded social media. Some called it manipulative, others genius. One viral TikTok stitched the scene of Jim confronting Ally Zoe Adams with a reaction video from a fan saying, "This man didn't fall off. He figured the algorithm out." And in that chaos, other rappers began to stir. Jay Dukas posted a photo of his mic with a cryptic caption, "Let the real ones speak soon." Pusha T tweeted a chessboard emoji with no context. Fans speculated was a new wave coming. Were other veterans about to push back? Because what Jim Jones had done wasn't just reclaim attention, he'd challenged the traditional order of who gets to speak, who gets to fade, and who decides when your era ends. In barbershops and college seminars, in TikTok comments and Discord threads, the same question kept surfacing. Is this where hip-hop is headed? Where storytelling, strategy, and spectacle collide so violently that truth becomes a secondary concern. As the screen faded to black in the final scene of the documentary, Jim stood on a rooftop, city lights behind him, and said quietly, "It ain't about being the best anymore. It's about being unforgettable." Then he turned and walked out. Of frame, no beat drop, no applause, just silence. And that silence said everything. The cultural shift wasn't theoretical any, which was measurable. In the weeks following Jim Jones' documentary, A&Rs and digital marketing teams across the industry began speaking openly about conflict-based campaigns. Labels weren't just scouting talent, they were scouting controversy potential. Could this artist hold a podcast moment? Could they bait the right conversation? Could they trend without music? Suddenly, going viral wasn't a bonus, it was the blueprint. And every conversation circled back to one man, Jim Jones. Podcasts dedicated entire episodes to dissecting his playbook. He turned backlash into a business plan. One strategist said he trolled his way into a legacy. In Atlanta, a rising rapper dropped a diss aimed at a 90s legend, pure bait. In LA, an unknown artist faked a live altercation for Clout, only for fans to expose the lie and still reward him with streams. The line between authentic and performative began to blur, and for better or worse, Jim Jones had helped redraw it. Meanwhile, artists from the old guard watched uneasily. Talib Kweli criticized the trend, saying, "Clout is not a substitute for craft." But even he admitted that Jim's maneuver was damn near genius in execution. Younger fans didn't care either way. They had grown up on chaos. Till them, the spectacle was the story. They didn't need a classic album. They needed a moment. And Jim Jones had delivered one with the precision of a general. In one interview, he acknowledged the shift. "The kids ain't looking for your favorite verse," he said. "They lookin' for who set the room on fire." And in that metaphor, he stood at the center of a movement he helped ignite. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't wait for cosigns. He created noise loud enough to drown out doubt. And now everyone was trying to shout over it. Whether that noise would echo through time like a classic or just fade with the next scandal remained the only question left unanswered. Months later, when the noise finally began to settle, what remained wasn't scandal, it was architecture. Jim Jones hadn't just made a comeback, he'd built a blueprint. A model of modern survival in a genre that recycles relevance faster than it crowns kings. The industry, now fully aware of the power behind spectacle, continued to shift around. His example. Workshops popped up teaching narrative engineering. Panels at music festivals cited him as case study. And yet, through all the rewiring, one undeniable question lingered like smoke in a burned-out room. Was this the future, or had we lost something in the fire? Jim Jones never gave a definitive answer. He didn't need to. His actions had spoken, louder than any lyric. When asked during a sit-down with Complex what he thought of the term clout rapper, he smiled and said, "I call it evolution." His tone wasn't defensive, it was resolved. Outside the studio, kids lined up for merch drops. Not Dipset shirts. Relevance is a weapon, tees, hoodies, tote bags. It wasn't about an era anymore. It was about a mindset. Meanwhile, Nas, still silent, saw a quiet resurgence. His streams ticked up. Vinyl sales surged. Think pieces framed him as the calm amidst chaos. Without saying a word, he had preserved a different kind of power, the one that doesn't shout but still resonates. And that duality, that tension between Jones' fire and Nas' silence, became the metaphor for where hip-hop stood. One end, disruption. On the other, discipline. In the end, the culture wasn't choosing one over the other. It was learning how to live with both. Because hip-hop, at its core, has always been both war and poetry. And in 2025, Jim Jones reminded the world that in a time ruled by noise, even chaos can have cadence. He didn't rewrite the game, he changed how it's played. And when the books are written about this era, whether they praise him or critique him, one truth will remain. Jim Jones didn't just chase relevance, he turned it into legacy.